encourage you to turn in your Bibles to Luke chapter 20, where we'll be talking about things Jesus talks about there, about Caesar and God. It's that famous phrase, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's. He goes on to say, and render unto God the things that are God's. But I think sometimes maybe we forget that last part and even shorten it shorter than all of that and just say render unto Caesar, and that sort of becomes shorthand to, pay your taxes. Or, there's obligations to government, and so do that. And that's part of the lesson, but there will be a little more to it. So Caesar or God seems to be the challenge, or the main question here in this lesson. So if we take a step back and think about our context here, we've been going through this Gospel of Luke, and he's come finally to Jerusalem. And we're in this final week. It's kind of confusing which day exactly we're in. Some have suggested what we're going to study today covers like Wednesday of that final week, maybe Tuesday or Wednesday, I'm not sure. But we're in that final week. And so on that Sunday, Jesus entered Jerusalem, or approached or came to Jerusalem, the triumphal entry, and people understood him to be coming as a king in some sense, causing an uproar and a stir about that. And then he goes in and cleanses the temple because of the corrupt things that were going on in that temple complex area that ought not to have been going on, selling things, knocked over the tables and all this, caused a very big stir. And at the end of that situation, in Luke 19, verse 47, it says that, after that he was teaching daily in the temple, that the chief priests and the scribes and the leading men among the people were trying to destroy him. They saw Jesus as a threat and as a problem, and they were going to destroy him. Of course, we see how that plays out, being familiar with where we're headed in this week of Jesus' life that is leading to the cross, but also to the resurrection. But as they're upset with him, trying to destroy him, they're basically confront him, who do you think you are, Jesus? And so, where do you get this authority? And then he threw that back on them with that question. Well, let's talk about John the Baptizer. Where did he get his authority? From God or from men? And they had this whole, challenge that, well, how are we going to answer that? If we answer this way, we're in trouble. If we answer that way, we're in trouble. And so they said, we don't know. And so Jesus says, well, I'm not telling you. I'm not answering your question either. And then we had that parable of the vine growers. Again, this confrontation in his teachings where he's telling them essentially, you guys killed God's prophets who have come. And maybe not explicitly saying, but we understand Jesus is in a sense a prophet, but the Son of God himself, and you're going to kill me too, and God is going to destroy you for this. And Matthew even has this word wretches to describe them. These wretches are going to have a wretched death. So there's conflict. Jesus isn't just writing postcards here. This is this conflict between the strong teachings that Jesus has and then these religious leaders there in Jerusalem. And so we get to this question that we're going to look at here in our text of Caesar or God. What about the things of Caesar? What about the things of God? And we'll develop that a little more as we go in here. Let's just read our text in Luke chapter 20, verses 19 through 26. And I'll be reading from the Legacy Standard Bible. Luke 20, 19 through 26. And the scribes and the chief priests tried to lay hands on him that very hour. But they feared the people, for they understood that he spoke this parable against them. So they watched him and sent spies who pretended to be righteous so that they might catch him in some statement in order to deliver him to the rule and the authority of the governor. And they questioned him, saying, Teacher, we know that you speak and teach correctly, and you are not partial to any, but teach the way of God in truth. Is it lawful for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not? But he perceived their craftiness and said to them, "Show me a denarius. Whose likeness and inscription does it have?" They said, "Caesar's." And he said to them, "Then render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and render to God the things that are God's." And they were unable to catch him in a word in the presence of the people, and marveling at his answer, they became silent. So that first verse is sort of a do-over in a sense. I used that in our last lesson, but it's sort of a transitional verse, verse 19, as we transition from that parable of the vine dressers we talked about. It says, "The scribes and the chief priests tried to lay hands on him that very hour, for they feared the people. For they understood that he spoke this parable, that parable of the vine dressers, where he was saying, 'You guys kill the prophets. You're going to kill the Son.' It was spoken against them. So it made them more angry, and that's what, of course, leads to the rest of this. Because the people, in general, the people were following Jesus. Jesus was popular among the regular people, but it's these religious leaders in Jerusalem, of course, the Pharisees that we had seen earlier, and I've mentioned that Luke doesn't mention the Pharisees anymore, although the other gospel accounts mentions them kind of all being in cahoots together here, but for some reason Luke doesn't mention them. So all these different people who had some status or authority as religious leaders are the ones with whom Jesus is having this conflict. And so if these leaders were just to come and take him and try to lay hands on him, it was going to be a problem because so many people were supporting Jesus. They were fearing the people because that would cause them to lose their status as leaders and cause an open revolt perhaps against them. So they need a more clever plan than to just grab him and arrest him, because that's not going to work politically, and they're going to get into trouble that way. So verse 20 is where we get into that. There's this idea that they're watching him. They're sending spies. They're watching him like a hawk. It's sort of they're having a surveillance situation here. Almost like the CIA would do or something. They sent spies to trap him, to catch him. They're pretending to be righteous, but they're wicked, and they're trying to get Jesus, trying to catch him in some statement, get him to say something that would get him into trouble, so they can deliver him to the rule and the authority of the governor. Now, think about that for a moment. Who's the governor in Jerusalem at this time? We'll see more about him later. That's Pontius Pilate. Of course, they ultimately are going to deliver him to the rule and authority of the governor, but not right here with this. But that's their goal. So the idea would be, since if they were to just arrest him, the people would be all upset with these religious leaders. The goal is to somehow get him caught in what he says. So it's not our fault. Jesus said stuff, and the governor arrested him. Pilate did it. Jesus' own words got him in trouble. It's sort of their plan here. They don't want to take the blame. So it's actually kind of a clever plan they had. If it was against some regular political person, that may have been successful. So as they set their trap here, here we go in verse 21. They're going to set their trap. They question him in their sneaky way, right? They're not being honest. They question him saying, "Teacher, we know that you speak and teach correctly." You can just hear the sarcasm. Not that they were talking in a way that sounded sarcastic. They're trying to really trick Jesus. Some other person would maybe be fooled by this and think, "Oh, this is a friend. We know that you speak and teach correctly, and you are not partial to any, but teach the way of God in truth," because those are all true things about Jesus, aren't they? Jesus is true and speaks correctly and never says anything wrong, and he's following God's way. He's God on earth. But they don't mean that. They're just trying to trick him. They make you think comfortable, like, "Oh, you're among friends here, Jesus." This false flattery is from these Jewish spies. And so this next part, verses 22 and onward, I'm going to kind of address it twice. So here's the first pass, kind of maybe a shortcut interpretation about what we're going to have here. So they ask this question, these spies sent by the Jewish religious leaders. They ask him this question: is it right for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Now I'm quoting the NIV here. Is it right? Is it right to do that? Some translations will say lawful. Is it lawful or is it right? So, is it okay to pay taxes? You know, there's some concern among the culture there about people whether they should do that or not. But there's this trap, kind of like the trap that Jesus had set for them. You know, is John the immerser? Is he from God or is he from men? And they're like, oh, if we say this or that, we're going to get in trouble. It's kind of what they're trying to do here. So if Jesus says, yes, it is right to pay taxes to Caesar, then the people who are all upset at Rome taking over their country would say, well, are you a Rome sympathizer, you know? But if he says, no, it's not right to pay taxes, you know, don't pay your taxes to Caesar, well, that's kind of what they want to get him in trouble with, to take him to the governor, because then it's insurrection, it's seditious, it's treasonous against the government there. The leaders are going to tell Pilate then, and he's going to get arrested, and they're going to get what they want. So, which way is Jesus going to go? And then verse 23, but he perceived their craftiness, he knew this was a trick, and he said to them, show me a denarius, whose likeness and inscription does it have? And that's one of the words I'm going to drill into more. Is it likeness or is it image? And they said, you know, it's Caesar's. It's both his face, the image, the likeness, and also the words on it mention Caesar. He said to them, well then render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And they were not able to, in the presence of the people, to catch him in what he said. Their trap failed. But marveling at his answer, they became silent. So, in a very basic idea here, yes, you should pay your taxes, but you should also be faithful to God. There's these two ideas. So he kind of diffused the question a little bit and didn't get in trouble. Maybe hedged his answer in a way would be one perspective of this. There's those two areas of concern. Caesar has a realm of concern, and we should honor that, but we should, put God first, certainly. So they're thinking, well, wow, he didn't answer the question the way we expected, and he foiled our plan. He didn't get in trouble with this answer. And I think that's all basically right. Yes, we should pay our taxes, and we should honor God and worship him. That's what's due him, in a sense, right? The taxes are due to Caesar, and we should honor and worship God. But if we dig a little deeper, maybe look at some of these words in more detail. Verse 22, the Legacy Standard Bible that I usually read from here, it says, is it lawful for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not? So the NIV and the New Living Translation has, is it right? I think it kind of misses the point, because it's more like, is it lawful, according to us Jewish people, the law of Moses, and how we should live our lives according to the law of Moses? And this is the same kind of question, like in Luke 6:2, some of the Pharisees said, why do you do what is not lawful on the Sabbath? And so then Jesus, in his response to this back there in Luke 6, cites 1 Samuel 21. It goes to the Old Testament to talk about the law and that sort of thing. Talk about, in that case, David had the sacred bread and that sort of thing, and the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath, all of that. So that's how you respond to a question. That's how a Jewish rabbi responds to a question about, is it lawful to do this or that? They go to the law of Moses. So if we look at Luke 20, verse 22, that question, is it lawful for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not? How are you going to respond to this from the Old Testament? Now, these Jewish leaders, seeing Jesus as a threat and coming in as a king and as a Messiah figure, They've seen people come in that way before, and they lead these, start these revolutions, and then it causes a lot of trouble, and they get into a war, and it ends badly. And this is what they're probably trying to fight against. So seeing Jesus as a person like that, they're probably expecting him to give some sort of incendiary, revolutionary answer. So how is he going to go to the scriptures? Maybe he would go to Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 16, and say, thinking about the Old Testament, only in the cities of these people that Yahweh your God is giving you as an inheritance, you shall not leave alive anything that breathes, but you shall devote them to destruction, the Hittite and the Amorite, the Canaanite and the Perizzite and the Hivite and the Jebusite, as Yahweh your God has commanded you. And he might go on and say, and today the Romans have taken over our promised land, and as God commanded, we should throw them out and leave no one alive. That would be perhaps what was expected of a Messiah figure coming in to be this king. And if he said something like that, well, they'd get what they want and get him in trouble. And hey, Governor Pilate, this guy's calling for this Roman army to be destroyed, and we're going to have a war and all this. That would be a powder keg right there. He's saying this is the promised land, and we shouldn't pay taxes, and we should be driving the Romans out of here. But that's not what Jesus said, right? This is my imagination of quoting a passage, thinking about how he may have responded. But how did Jesus actually respond? From the law. Now remember too, in Jerusalem we had the Sadducees were kind of in charge, and they specifically didn't believe in any part of the Old Testament except for the law of Moses. So Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, right? That's all that they really believed in. So how is he going to respond? Now if we go back here to Luke 20, 23 through 24, before we get to how he responds here. But detecting their craftiness, he said to them, "Show me a denarius. Whose image and inscription does it have?" Caesar's, they said. So we might look at this idea of the image. It's not merely whose face is on there, but this idea of an image is I think deeper than that. But thinking about this coin, what was this coin? It was a silver coin, and although I have an enormous picture on the screen, it'd probably be the size of about a dime. We're used to a dime. And this is a denarius. We often refer to denarius as a day's wages. So think about what people make. It's probably not a penny. I think the King James Version calls this a penny, and that would give us the idea of a very small amount of money. So more than that, $100 or $200, whatever people make in a day. I don't know. But on there is this image of Caesar. That's Tiberius Caesar. And the words around it as well. So I don't know Latin. Probably none of us do. Maybe my wife does. But the words that go around here basically say, and there's some shortening of words, but it's Tiberius Caesar, son of the divine Augustus. So he's the adopted son of the previous Caesar, Augustus Caesar, who was considered by the Roman culture to be divine. He's a god, so to speak. And so this new Caesar, who's currently reigning here, he's the son of God. So that's pretty blasphemous, right? And that's part of what the inscription would have been. That they didn't, we didn't cite that here in Luke, but this is what the coin would have said on it. And then the backside of the coin is thought to have his mother. Her name was Livia, and she's depicted as a goddess of peace. So seated as a goddess of peace, Pax, like the Pax Romana, that sort of thing. And the words around there say Pontiff Maximus, high priest, or the highest priest. So these are both offensive things to the Jewish people. That, number one, there's this king that we didn't vote for. We don't want this guy. He's a foreign invader. And there's this idol on the back. And he's claiming to be the Son of God, and the high priest, the highest priest, we're here in Jerusalem, and we have the temple, and we have a high priest. And this is blasphemy. This is horrible stuff. But is it lawful to pay to Caesar? Is the question. So thinking about where Jesus goes with this, is it lawful? How does he appeal to the law of Moses? There's this image. He's asking whose image is on the coin. If we go back to Genesis 1:26, he doesn't cite all this, but I think this is the allusion. So then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, so that they will have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps in the earth." And we understand that God set man, humans, on the earth for a purpose. And it's interesting that this word in the Old Testament and also in the New Testament is sometimes, or actually more often, applied to graven images, these idols and things. There's these idea of these demons, and then there's these statues or whatever that represent the idea of these demons. But then we, as people, are supposed to represent the true God. We're made in His image. But are we living our lives that way? Are we in the image of God? Or are we in the image of some man or of demons? Humans are made in the image of God. And thinking about this idea of how the money is thought of here kind of makes me think of in Acts chapter 8, verse 20, where the situation with Peter talking to Simon the sorcerer, who was trying to buy the miraculous gifts of the Holy Spirit. He said, maybe your silver perish with you. He offered to buy those things with silver. I think that may be sort of the idea implicit in Jesus' response. Don't worry about this money. You're all worried about, should we pay taxes and this? It's just money. Do what you're supposed to do. He can have his silver. Whose picture's on that? Whose image is on that coin, and whose inscription? Who is it honoring? It's honoring false gods and a false king. Let him have it. It's got his name on it. He issued it. May your silver perish with you, Caesar, perhaps is implicit in the idea here. Verse 25. He said to them, "Then render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's." Give him his money. It's his money. "And render to God the things that are God's." Because the things of Caesar's really aren't that much, right? In John chapter 19, verse 11, when Jesus is confronted with Pilate, he says, "You would have no authority over me, Pilate, unless it had been given you from above." So we understand that kings of the earth only have power as God allows it to be that way. In Romans 13, we studied recently the idea that taxes belong to governments, and these governments are ordained by God. And at Romans 13, verse 7, Paul said to render to all what is due to them, and talks about taxes and honor and these different things that in that realm of physical things we need to do. But this idea of deity and this idea of priesthood do not belong to Caesar. Those claims on that coin are false. Those things don't belong to Caesar. They belong to God. So what belongs to God? Basically everything. He is the creator of all the earth. And in Genesis, as we cited there, humans are made in the image of God. Male and female, He created them. And in Psalm chapter 50, the 50th Psalm, verse 10, He says, "Every beast is mine. The cattle on 1,000 hills are mine." That's in the context of being upset with their offering of sacrifices in the wrong way and not having the right hearts. He's like, "I don't really need all this stuff you're offering me. I own it all already. I need your hearts to be right." The cattle on 1,000 hills belong to the Lord. And as we looked at here in Romans 12 recently, we studied this. If we're in the image of God, therefore, I exhort you, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a sacrifice, living and holy and pleasing to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. We're in the image of God. We should be serving God and not false things like false religions or men and those sorts of things. So this coin that's the center of this controversy, this has this image of Caesar. We are to be in the image of God, but this coin has the image of Caesar, and those false claims about his deity and priesthood are to be rejected. But nevertheless, it's his coin, and the governments are ordained by God. So, after all of that, verse 26, they were unable to catch him in a word in the presence of the people, and marveling at his answer, they became silent. So they still are failing to catch him and trap him, right? He didn't make the point they expected. Where's this revolutionary, crazy talk that misapplying Old Testament scriptures that I had suggested perhaps he could have said? Well, he didn't do that. He could have said, cast the Gentiles from the land, because that's what God said for the Philistines or something, And he also didn't, on that other side, pledge allegiance to Caesar and go, to be a Roman sympathizer or anything. He appealed back to their own law of Moses, that from Genesis, one of those first 5 books that the Sadducees would give credence to. You were created in his image, so honor God. Caesar owns that money anyway, so give it back to him. Let the silver perish with him. Governments are ordained by God and have no power except as God allows them to have. So we might think, well, Jesus answered well. They can never accuse Jesus of saying that you shouldn't pay your taxes, because he clearly said render to Caesar, right? Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. Well, later on, of course, we see, Luke chapter 23, verse 2, we will see, they began to accuse him, saying, we found this man misleading our nation, forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ the King. Well, he is the king, but he never he never told people not to pay taxes to Caesar. There's not some other stuff he said where he said that. We read what he said. Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar, and render to God the things that are God's. So it doesn't matter what he actually said. These are liars. These are wicked people who are going to accuse him and cause trouble anyway. Jesus never said that we should not pay our taxes to Caesar. And when those things run in opposition to each other, in Acts chapter 5, verse 29, we know that Peter said there, we must obey God rather than men. There comes a time for that. But we're not breaking God's commandments to pay our taxes. Governments are ordained by God. So, this question, Caesar or God? I changed it a little bit here from the things of Caesar to the image of Caesar. Are we made in the image of Caesar? Are we following him, so to speak? The things of the world, we might say. Or are we made in the image of God? We are made in the image of God, but are we living our lives as though that were true, since it is true? We can go off the deep end with being loyal to the things of the world instead of loyal to the things of God. So I'll leave you with verse 25. And he said to them, then render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. So sure, we should obey the government and pay our taxes and obey the laws to the extent that they don't conflict with God's laws. We should obey God rather than men. But the bigger question, the bigger point, is the second part. Render to Caesar, yes, but render to God the things that are God's. Are we obeying God? Are we living lives according to His will? Are we submitting to His commands? Have we heard the Word of God, the simple message of God? And do we believe Jesus is the Son of God? And do we repent of our sins and turn away from those things? Do we confess Jesus as Lord in our lives by the way we live? Have we been immersed in water? Have we submitted to that? Just as we're buried in those waters of baptism, it brings to mind that the death of Christ, and then we're, just as He rose from the dead, we're raised to walk in a new life, having forgiveness of sins. And are we being faithful, recognizing that we need to be faithful until death, and that He'll give us the crown of life? Can we help you with anything today? Are you rendering to God the things that are God's? That's really the point. We're going to sing Zion's Call. Zion as in Mount Zion, as in the eternal city of God. It'll be in the new heavens, the new earth. It's calling us to follow Him, calling us to make disciples, and all of those things. If we can help you in any way to obey the gospel, or if you need prayers, or if you need to study, we encourage you to come forward or talk with me afterwards as we stand and sing the song.